The Mafia Boss swung open his hotel door at 3 a.m. and froze. His ex-wife stood there in a maid's uniform, skeletal and shaking, 3 months pregnant with the child she'd never told him about. Tess had fled Cole Hudson 4 years ago to escape his world. Tonight, starving on ramen and pride, she'd accidentally delivered scotch to his door. His eyes moved over her devastated frame, the 20 pounds she'd lost, the holes in her shoes, the trembling that screamed starvation. When he spoke, every word was a threat. "You're carrying my baby, and you were going to let yourself die rather than tell me." Tess couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process the reality of Cole Hudson standing 3 feet away, close enough to touch, looking straight through her like she was transparent. Her brain was screaming contradictory commands: run before he recognizes you, speak before he closes the door, do something other than stand here frozen like prey that spotted a predator and lost all capacity for rational thought. She stared at him, her lips parting around words that wouldn't form, around explanations that couldn't possibly justify what he was seeing. His ex-wife, the woman who'd walked away from marriage and security and protection, reduced to delivering scotch in a maid's uniform at 3 in the morning. Of all the hotels in the city, of all the suites, of all the nights, Cole frowned, registering her continued presence with the first hints of irritation. His hand stilled on the door, preparing to swing it closed, to eliminate this minor disruption from his evening. "I said leave," he started, his tone sharpening with dismissal. Then his eyes met hers, really met them, locked on with sudden, absolute focus as recognition detonated behind the cold exterior. The change in his expression was instantaneous and devastating. Shock first, genuine, unguarded surprise that shattered his controlled facade. Then something darker, more complex, fury mixed with horror, mixed with something that looked almost like pain. His gaze swept down her body with clinical precision, cataloging every detail she'd hoped he wouldn't see. The uniform that hung loose on a frame that had lost 20 pounds she couldn't afford to lose. The exhaustion etched into features she knew looked gaunt, hollowed out by months of inadequate sleep and insufficient food. The hands gripping the cart that trembled not from nerves but from the particular weakness that came from skipped meals and double shifts. Tess. Her name came out strangled, like he'd been punched in the throat. "What the fuck?" He stopped mid-sentence, jaw locking down hard enough she could see muscles jump beneath skin. His hands, which had been casually relaxed seconds ago, curled into fists at his sides. The cold fury radiating from him was terrifying precisely because it was controlled, contained, the kind of rage that didn't need volume to communicate absolute danger. Cole's eyes moved past her to the corridor, checking for witnesses with the automatic awareness of someone always conscious of surveillance. Then his hand shot out, gripping her wrist with enough force to make her gasp, and he pulled her forward into the suite with a strength that lifted her slightly off her feet. The door slammed shut behind them with a boom that echoed like a gunshot. Tess stumbled, the momentum of his pull carrying her several steps into the suite before she caught her balance. The cart stayed abandoned in the hallway, the $100 bill still resting on its tray, meaningless now. Cole stood between her and the door, blocking any escape, his chest rising and falling with breaths that came too fast. His eyes never left her face, moving over her features with an intensity that felt physical, cataloging every change 4 years had carved into someone he'd once known intimately. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, lethally quiet, the kind of quiet that preceded violence or ultimatums or conversations that would change everything. "What in God's name are you doing in that uniform?" The presidential suite's interior was exactly what Tess would have expected, vast, elegantly appointed, the kind of space designed for people who commanded empires rather than served them. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city 45 stories below, millions of lights creating constellations against darkness. The furniture was modern, expensive, arranged in groupings that suggested casual wealth. Everything was pristine, untouched, like Cole had checked in but barely occupied the space beyond sleeping, if he'd slept at all. The darkness under his eyes suggested otherwise. If you're still thinking about them, subscribe and become part of our story family. Your support is what keeps these emotional journeys alive. Comment where you're watching from. Let's share this experience together. Tess stood frozen just inside the door, her uniform suddenly feeling even more shameful under the suite's soft lighting, under Cole's burning attention. She couldn't answer his question, couldn't find words that would explain how the woman who'd once lived in a penthouse even more luxurious than this had ended up wearing maid's clothes and delivering scotch for tips. Cole watched her silence, reading it with the same acute perception he'd always possessed. His jaw tightened further, something dangerous flickering behind his eyes. "How long?" he demanded. How long have you been working here? 6 months, Tess whispered, the truth slipping out before she could consider whether honesty was wise. 6 months. Cole repeated the words like they were physically painful. 6 months you've been, he stopped, seeming unable to finish the sentence. His gaze swept down her uniform again, lingering on details that made his expression progressively darker. You've lost weight. Too much weight. When did you last eat? Tess's hand moved instinctively to her stomach, a protective gesture she immediately regretted when Cole's eyes tracked the movement with laser focus. I eat, she said defensively. When? Cole pressed. When was your last real meal, Tess? She couldn't remember. Yesterday? 2 days ago? Time had a way of blurring together when you were working double shifts and subsisting on whatever free food the hotel staff room offered: stale pastries, leftover bread, the occasional sandwich someone hadn't finished. Her silence was answer enough. Cole turned away abruptly, one hand raking through his hair with enough force to disturb its careful styling. He paced to the windows, staring out at the city like it held answers, his shoulders rigid with tension barely contained. 4 years, he said without looking at her. 4 years you've been gone. 4 years I respected your decision to leave. Gave you the space you demanded. Stayed away like you asked. He turned back to face her, and the raw emotion in his expression made her chest ache. And this is what you did with your freedom? This is the safe, independent life you chose over staying with me? I had my reasons, Tess said, finding her voice despite the shame burning in her throat. Your reasons, Cole repeated flatly. Your pride. Your fear of my world. Your desperate need to prove you could survive without me. His voice was rising now, control slipping as fury overwhelmed calculation. And look what that pride bought you: a maid's uniform and a body that's eating itself because you're too stubborn to ask for help. I didn't want your help, Tess shot back, her own anger sparking despite exhaustion. I didn't want to be dependent on you. Didn't want my survival contingent on staying married to a man whose business involved things I couldn't know about and couldn't control. So you chose this instead? Cole gestured at her uniform with barely contained rage. You chose poverty and exhaustion and pushing carts through hotel corridors at 3 a.m? You think that's better than being protected? It was my choice, Tess said, her voice breaking slightly. My decision about my own life. Your choice is killing you, Cole said brutally. Look at yourself, Tess. You're exhausted, malnourished, one bad shift away from collapsing. That's not independence. That's pride so toxic it's destroying you. Tess felt tears threaten, felt the humiliation of everything he was saying crash over her like cold water. Because he was right. Every word was accurate and devastating and impossible to refute. She'd left seeking safety and found only struggle. Had fled his dangerous world and ended up in a different kind of danger, the slow, grinding thread of poverty that wore people down until nothing remained but survival instinct and desperation. Why didn't you come to me? Cole asked, and his voice had gone quiet again, fury temporarily displaced by something that sounded almost like pain. When things got bad, when you couldn't make rent, when you were hungry, why didn't you reach out? Because I was afraid, Tess admitted, the confession torn from somewhere deep and shameful. Afraid you'd think I only came back because I needed money. Afraid you'd take control again. Make decisions for me. Pull me back into your world without giving me choices. Afraid, she stopped, the final truth too heavy to speak. Afraid of what? Cole pressed, moving closer, erasing the distance between them with slow, deliberate steps. Afraid I'd never want to leave again, Tess whispered. Afraid being with you would feel too good, too safe, too necessary. Afraid I'd lose myself completely if I let you protect me again. Cole was standing directly in front of her now, close enough that she could feel heat radiating from him, could see the exact moment when something in his expression shifted from fury to something more complex and infinitely more dangerous. And now, he asked softly, now that I've found you like this, what happens now, Tess? Tess opened her mouth to answer, but before she could speak, Cole's hand moved to her face, not roughly, but with careful deliberation, tilting her chin up so she couldn't avoid his gaze. His eyes searched hers with intensity that felt invasive, penetrating past every defense she'd constructed over 4 years of separation, and she saw the exact moment when he found what he was looking for, when recognition clicked into place behind his careful control. You're pregnant, Cole said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement delivered with absolute certainty, and Tess felt her world collapse into that single, devastating truth she'd been hiding from everyone, including herself. Her silence confirmed what he'd already determined. Cole's hand moved from her face to her stomach, resting there with a gentleness that seemed at odds with the fury still visible in his eyes. "How far along?" 3 months, Tess whispered, unable to lie to him now, unable to maintain any pretense in the face of his unwavering focus. "I only found out last month, and you didn't tell me." Not accusatory, just factual. Another item in the catalog of her terrible decisions. "I didn't think you'd want to know," Tess said quietly. "We're divorced. You've moved on. I assumed." "You assumed wrong," Cole interrupted, his voice dropping to something cold and absolute. "You assumed I stopped caring about you just because you left. You assumed 4 years of silence meant indifference rather than respect for boundaries you demanded." His hand pressed more firmly against her stomach, a claim being staked whether she wanted it or not. "You assumed I wouldn't want to know I'm going to be a father." Tess felt tears finally break free, tracking down her cheeks in hot trails she couldn't control. "Cole, I can't do this. I can't go back to your world. Can't become dependent again. Can't." "You don't have a choice anymore," Cole said. And the finality in his voice was terrifying and comforting in equal measure. "This isn't about pride or independence or your fear of my life. This is about our child. And I'll be damned if I let you raise my heir while working yourself to death in a hotel maid uniform." He released her, stepping back but not away, his eyes never leaving her face. "Here's what's going to happen. You're done with this job as of right now. You're moving into my penthouse, where you'll have proper food, proper rest, proper medical care, and we're going to figure out what comes next together. Not with you making unilateral decisions that nearly killed you." "You can't just—" Tess started. "I can," Cole interrupted. "And I am. You can hate me for it. You can resent the loss of independence. You can spend the next 6 months furious about being controlled. But you will be safe, fed, and protected. That's non-negotiable." Tess stared at him, seeing the implacable determination in every line of his body, understanding that arguing would be futile. Cole Hudson had found his ex-wife pregnant and destitute, and his response was exactly what she should have predicted: absolute, overwhelming, suffocating protection whether she wanted it or not. And the most terrifying part was how much she wanted to accept it, how desperately she craved the safety he was offering, how ready she was to surrender every shred of pride if it meant no longer being hungry, no longer being exhausted, no longer facing this pregnancy alone. "I'm scared," she admitted, the words barely audible. "I know," Cole said, and something in his voice gentled slightly. "But Tess, you should have been more scared of the alternative, because what you've been doing that wasn't living. That was slowly dying with your pride intact." He was right. She knew he was right. And finally, after 4 years of running, after 6 months of barely surviving, after 3 months of carrying a secret that terrified her, Tess Walker stopped fighting. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Cole exhaled, some of the tension draining from his shoulders. "Good. We'll deal with the details tomorrow. Tonight, you're going to eat actual food, take a shower that doesn't have a time limit, and sleep in a bed that doesn't require rent you can't afford." He moved toward her again, this time without the edge of fury, his hands gentle as they framed her face. "And Tess, this isn't about control. This isn't about taking away your choices. This is about loving you enough to save you from decisions that were destroying you." Then he kissed her soft, careful, like she was something precious he'd thought he'd lost forever and had just miraculously recovered. And Tess, exhausted and hungry and terrified and desperate, kissed him back and let herself believe that maybe, possibly, surrendering pride for protection wasn't the same as losing herself. Maybe it was finally, for the first time in 4 years, finding herself again. Cole guided Tess deeper into the suite with a hand on her lower back, the touch firm enough to communicate non-negotiable direction but careful enough not to hurt. She moved mechanically, her legs unsteady beneath her, exhaustion and shock combining to make simple locomotion feel impossibly complex. He steered her toward the leather sofa positioned near the windows, the kind of furniture that cost more than 3 months of her current salary, and she sank into it with a small, involuntary sound of relief. Her feet had been screaming for hours. Now, finally off them, the pain intensified briefly before beginning to fade into the background ache she'd learned to classify as normal. Cole stood across from her, maintaining distance that felt deliberate, his arms crossed over his chest in a posture that suggested barely controlled fury. The silk robe had fallen open completely now, revealing the full breadth of shoulders and chest she remembered touching, kissing, mapping with hands that had once held the right to explore him without permission. He looked harder than she remembered, more muscled, Like he'd spent the past 4 years in the gym working off frustrations he couldn't express through other channels. "Start talking," he said, his voice still carrying that lethal quiet that made her stomach clench with apprehension. "And don't leave anything out. I want to know exactly how you went from my wife to a hotel maid in 4 years. Every decision, every choice, every moment of pride that led you here." Tess felt anger spark through exhaustion, a flash of the defiance that had driven her to leave in the first place. "I'm not your wife. We're divorced, Cole. You signed the papers." "I signed the papers. That relationship ended 4 years ago when I decided I couldn't live in your world anymore." "The papers ended a legal contract," Cole said coldly. "They didn't end what existed between us, and they certainly didn't give you permission to self-destruct while I stood back respecting boundaries you claimed to need." "I did need them," Tess shot back. "I needed distance from your life, from the constant fear that something would happen to you or to me because of what you do. I needed to not wake up every morning wondering if that day would be the day your business caught up with you, with us. I needed—" "You needed what?" Cole interrupted. "Safety? Independence? The illusion that you were better off alone?" He gestured at her uniform with barely contained rage. "Look what that need bought you, Tess. Look at what your independence cost." "At least I made my own choices," Tess said, her voice rising despite exhaustion. "At least I wasn't dependent on a man whose business I couldn't understand, whose enemies I couldn't identify, whose life operated in shadows I wasn't allowed to illuminate. You wanted me to just accept it all, to trust you blindly while people around you disappeared or ended up in hospitals or worse. No one ever touched you," Cole said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "In 5 years of marriage, not once did my business put you in danger. Not once did anyone threaten you, approach you, even look at you wrong. I protected you completely, absolutely, while you invented threats that didn't exist to justify your fear. If you're still thinking about them, subscribe and become part of our story family. Your support is what keeps these emotional journeys alive. Comment where you're watching from. Let's share this experience together." "They existed," Tess insisted. "Maybe not in physical form, but they were there. Every phone call you took in another room, every meeting you wouldn't discuss, every time you came home with that particular look in your eyes that meant something had gone wrong, something you'd handled, something I wasn't supposed to know about." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold, despite the suite's controlled temperature. "I couldn't live like that, Cole. Couldn't build a life on a foundation of things I wasn't allowed to understand. So you chose this instead," Cole said, gesturing at her uniform again. "You chose poverty and exhaustion and working yourself to death rather than accepting protection you viewed as too complicated, too morally ambiguous. Tell me, Tess, how's that working out for you?" Tess felt tears threaten again, felt the crushing weight of everything he was saying because it was true. All of it was devastatingly accurate. "I thought I could make it work," she whispered. "Thought if I just worked hard enough, saved carefully enough, I could build a life that was mine. Clean, simple, safe, no shadows, no secrets, no wondering what you were really doing when you said you had business to handle. And instead you ended up here," Cole said, "delivering scotch to strangers at 3 a.m, too thin, too exhausted, too proud to reach out to the one person who would have helped you without question, without judgment. You would have controlled me," Tess said. "You would have made decisions for me, taken over my life, eliminated my choices in the name of protection. That's what you do, Cole. That's who you are. You see problems and you solve them, whether the person with the problem wants your solution or not." "Is that what you think?" Cole's voice had gone quiet again, that particular quiet that preceded explosions or ultimatums. "That I would have controlled you? Eliminated your autonomy? Turned you into some kept woman with no agency? You're doing it right now," Tess pointed out. "You found me 30 minutes ago and you've already announced I'm moving into your penthouse, that I'm done with my job, that you're making unilateral decisions about my future. That's exactly the control I was afraid of." Cole was silent for a long moment, his jaw working like he was physically restraining words that wanted to escape. When he finally spoke, his voice held something that might have been pain beneath the fury. "The difference, Tess, is that right now your choices are killing you. You're pregnant, malnourished, working double shifts that are destroying your body. So yes, I'm taking control, because someone needs to save you from decisions that are literally dangerous to you and our child." "Our child," Tess repeated, her hand moving instinctively to her stomach again. "We're not married anymore, Cole. We're not together. This baby doesn't change that. This baby changes everything," Cole corrected, moving closer with the predatory grace she remembered too well. This baby means you're carrying my heir, which makes your well-being my absolute priority, whether you like it or not. This baby means I have a stake in your survival that transcends our divorce, your pride, or your fear of my world. He stopped directly in front of her, looming in ways that should have felt threatening but somehow felt protective instead. And this baby means I will do whatever is necessary, including overriding your independence, including making unilateral decisions, including becoming exactly the controlling man you're afraid of to ensure you both survive the next 6 months. Tess stared up at him, seeing the implacable determination in every line of his body, understanding that arguing further would be futile. So I don't get a choice. You get one choice, Cole said. You can accept my protection willingly, or you can fight it every step of the way. But either way, you're leaving this hotel, you're eating proper food, and you're receiving medical care. How comfortable that process is depends entirely on whether you stop being stubborn long enough to recognize I'm saving your life, not stealing it. You can't just kidnap me, Tess said, but her voice lacked conviction because exhaustion was making rational resistance increasingly difficult. I can do exactly that, Cole said, and I will, if necessary. But I'd prefer you come willingly, accept that your pride nearly killed you, and allow me to fix the damage 4 years of independence has caused. Tess closed her eyes, feeling tears track down her cheeks in hot trails she couldn't control. I hate this. I hate needing you. I hate that I can't survive on my own. I hate that you're right. I know, Cole said, and something in his voice gentled fractionally. But Tess? Hating it doesn't make it less true. And being too proud to accept help isn't strength. It's self-destruction disguised as independence. She opened her eyes to find him watching her with an intensity that felt invasive and comforting simultaneously. What happens now? Now you stop fighting, Cole said. Now you accept that I'm taking you home, feeding you, ensuring you and our child are safe. And then, he paused, something vulnerable flashing briefly across his features. Then we figure out what comes next. Together, not with you making unilateral decisions that nearly destroyed you. Tess wanted to argue, wanted to defend her choices, wanted to maintain some shred of the independence she'd fought so hard to claim. But exhaustion overwhelmed defiance, and somewhere beneath the fear and shame and crushing humiliation, she recognized truth in what he was saying. She'd almost destroyed herself, proving she didn't need him. Maybe it was time to admit she'd been wrong. Okay, she whispered. Okay, Cole, you win. This isn't about winning, Cole said, his hands moving to frame her face with surprising gentleness. This is about keeping you alive long enough to hate me for caring. Then he kissed her forehead, a gesture so tender it made her chest ache with everything she'd lost when she'd walked away 4 years ago. And Tess, finally, stopped fighting the inevitable. Cole disappeared into the suite's bedroom, returning moments later with a hotel robe that he draped over Tess's shoulders without asking permission. The fabric was thick, expensive, warm in ways her thin uniform had never been. She pulled it tight around herself, suddenly aware of how cold she'd been, how the hotel kept the staff areas slightly cooler than guest spaces to save money, how she'd stopped noticing discomfort because noticing required energy she couldn't spare. When did you eat last? Cole asked, moving to the phone mounted near the suite's entrance. And don't lie to me. I can see exactly how much weight you've lost. Tess tried to remember. Yesterday morning, some toast in the staff room before my shift started. Cole's hand stilled on the phone, his knuckles going white. It's 3:30 in the morning. You're telling me you haven't eaten in over 24 hours? I was going to eat after my shift ended at 6, Tess said defensively. I had ramen noodles at home. I was fine. Ramen noodles. Cole's voice had gone flat, emotionless, which somehow made it more terrifying than when he'd been shouting. You're pregnant and you're subsisting on ramen noodles and toast. Christ, Tess. How did you think this was going to end? I was managing, Tess said, but the words sounded weak even to her own ears. I had a plan. I was going to pick up extra shifts, save enough for first and last month's rent on a cheaper apartment, reduce my expenses. Your plan was killing you, Cole interrupted. He picked up the phone, dialing with sharp, angry movements. Yes, this is Suite 4502. I need food sent up immediately. Everything on your breakfast menu. Yes, everything. Eggs, pancakes, fruit, yogurt, toast, juice, coffee. Make that orange juice. Cancel the coffee. And make sure it arrives within 20 minutes, or someone's getting fired. He hung up without waiting for confirmation. Cole, I can't eat all that, Tess protested. You're going to try, Cole said, moving back to stand in front of her. And then you're going to tell me exactly how you ended up here. Every detail, Tess. I want to understand how the woman I married, the woman who had a degree in art history, who spoke 3 languages, who could negotiate with diplomats and criminals with equal effectiveness, ended up pushing carts through hotel corridors for minimum wage. Tess felt shame burn through her chest, hot and corrosive. I applied for positions in my field, museums, galleries, private collections. No one would hire me. Why not? Because my resume had a 4-year gap, Tess said quietly. Because I'd been Mrs. Cole Hudson for 5 years, and everyone in the art world knew exactly who you were, what you did. They saw my name and they saw liability, complications, potential danger they didn't want associated with their institutions. Cole's expression darkened. So they blacklisted you. They didn't need to blacklist me, Tess said. They just didn't call back, didn't respond to follow-ups. Made it clear through silence that Mrs. Cole Hudson, even ex-Mrs. Cole Hudson, wasn't welcome in their world. She pulled the robe tighter. So I tried other fields. Administrative work, project management, anything that would pay bills, but I had the same problem. My work history showed 5 years of marriage to you, and that made me unemployable to anyone who bothered to research. So you ended up here, Cole said, in hospitality work where they don't care about your past as long as you show up and push carts. I ended up here because this was the only place that would hire me, Tess corrected. Because the Hotel Monarch doesn't do extensive background checks on housekeeping staff, doesn't care who you used to be married to, doesn't ask questions as long as you're willing to work graveyard shifts nobody else wants. Her voice was cracking now, exhaustion and emotion, overwhelming her capacity to maintain composure. And yes, it's humiliating. Yes, I hate every minute of it. Yes, I spend my shifts avoiding mirrors because I can't stand seeing myself in this uniform, can't stand acknowledging what I've become. What you've become, Cole repeated, and something in his voice had shifted from anger to something more complex, is a survivor. You made terrible decisions, Tess. You let pride destroy opportunities, let fear of my world push you into isolation, but you survived. You kept fighting even when it would have been easier to give up. I didn't survive, Tess said bitterly. I barely existed. I worked double shifts and came home to an empty apartment that I could barely afford. I ate ramen and toast because that's what my budget allowed. I went weeks without talking to anyone except coworkers who didn't know my name and guests who didn't see me as human. The tears were flowing freely now, hot tracks down her face she couldn't control. I was so lonely, Cole. So profoundly, devastatingly lonely. Every day felt identical: work, sleep, work, survive. No friends because I couldn't afford social activities. No family because I was too ashamed to admit I'd failed at independence. Just endless, grinding isolation that I kept telling myself was better than being dependent on you. Cole moved then, dropping to his knees in front of the sofa so they were eye level, his hands reaching for hers with surprising gentleness. Why didn't you call me? When it got bad, when you were hungry and lonely and desperate, why didn't you reach out? Because I was terrified, Tess admitted. Terrified you'd think I only came back for money. Terrified you'd take control and I'd lose myself completely. Terrified that if I let you save me, I'd never want to leave again, and I'd end up right back where I started, married to a man whose world scared me, whose business I couldn't understand, whose enemies were invisible but always present. My enemies never touched you, Cole said, his voice intense with conviction. In 5 years of marriage, you were completely safe, protected, cherished. The only thing that hurt you was your own fear of theoretical dangers that never materialized. But they could have, Tess insisted. That's what you never understood. Every day I lived in your world was a day something terrible could happen. Every phone call could be the one telling me you'd been hurt, killed, arrested. Every stranger could be someone with a grudge, someone who'd decided I was leverage worth taking. She pulled her hands free from his, wrapping her arms around herself. I couldn't live like that, Cole. Couldn't build a life on the foundation of constant, low-level terror. So you chose a different kind of terror, Cole said. The terror of poverty, of hunger, of exhaustion so profound you can barely function. The terror of being alone with no support system, no safety net, no one who cared whether you survived or collapsed. Tell me, Tess, which terror was worse? The theoretical danger of my world, or the very real danger of the isolation you chose? Tess couldn't answer because the truth was too devastating to speak aloud. He was right. The danger she'd fled had been abstract, potential, never realized. The danger she'd chosen was concrete, immediate, grinding her down day by day until nothing remained but survival instinct and pride, too toxic to abandon. A knock at the door interrupted them. Cole stood, moving to accept the food service that arrived on rolling carts identical to the one Tess had been pushing earlier. 2 hotel staff members wheeled in trays laden with breakfast foods, their eyes carefully averted from Tess in her maid's uniform and hotel robe. They knew something irregular was happening but were too professional to acknowledge it. Cole tipped them with the same casual $100 bills that had meant nothing earlier, then locked the door behind them with definitive clicks. He wheeled one cart close to the sofa, removing silver covers to reveal scrambled eggs, pancakes, fresh fruit, yogurt, toast with butter and jam, orange juice in crystal glasses. "Eat," he commanded. Tess stared at the food, her stomach cramping with hunger so profound it had transcended into nausea. "I can't. It's too much. I'll be sick." "Then eat slowly," Cole said, his voice gentling slightly. "But you're going to eat, Tess. You're going to put food in your body that isn't ramen or stolen toast. And you're going to start the process of recovery from 4 years of self-imposed destruction." He handed her a plate of eggs and toast, the food still steaming, smelling better than anything Tess had encountered in months. Her hands shook as she accepted it, and she realized with horrible clarity that she was crying again, tears dripping onto eggs she couldn't believe she was allowed to eat. "I'm so tired," she whispered. "I'm so tired of fighting, Cole. So tired of pretending I'm strong enough to handle this alone." "Then stop fighting," Cole said, settling beside her on the sofa, close enough that his warmth surrounded her like a shield. "Stop pretending. Accept that you need help, that pride isn't worth dying for, that letting me protect you isn't the same as losing yourself." Tess took a shaky bite of eggs, the taste exploding across her tongue with intensity that made her realize how long it had been since she'd eaten real food, prepared by someone who cared about quality rather than efficiency. She chewed slowly, swallowed carefully, felt her stomach cramp and then relax into acceptance. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now you eat," Cole said. "Now you rest. Now you let me take care of you the way I should have been allowed to do 4 years ago." He paused, his hand moving to rest on her knee, warm and solid and real. "And then, Tess, we figure out how to build something better than what we had before. Something that acknowledges your need for independence while respecting my need to keep you safe. Something that works for both of us instead of destroying you to prove a point." Tess nodded, too exhausted to argue, too hungry to resist the food, too lonely to push away the comfort he was offering. She ate slowly, mechanically, while Cole sat beside her radiating protective intensity and watchful concern. And somewhere between bites of eggs and sips of orange juice, Tess accepted that her 4-year experiment in independence had failed catastrophically, and the only person who could save her from the consequences was the man she'd run away from to begin with. Pride, it turned out, was cold comfort when you were starving and alone. Tess had made it through half the plate of eggs and 2 bites of pancake before her stomach protested, cramping with the particular pain of a system too long deprived suddenly receiving abundance it couldn't process. She set down the fork with trembling hands, wrapping her arms around herself as nausea rolled through her in waves. Cole was beside her immediately, his hand on her back, rubbing slow circles that somehow helped. "Too much too fast," he said, not accusatory, just observational. "We'll go slower. Small amounts every few hours until your body remembers how to handle real food." "I'm sorry," Tess whispered, though she wasn't sure what she was apologizing for: the nausea, the situation, the 4 years of choices that had led here. "Don't apologize," Cole said. "Just breathe. The nausea will pass." They sat in silence while Tess focused on not vomiting the food she'd just eaten, focused on breathing through the cramps, focused on anything except the crushing humiliation of her body's inability to handle basic nutrition. Cole's hand never stopped its rhythmic movement on her back, grounding her through the worst of it. When the nausea finally subsided, Tess leaned back against the sofa cushions, exhausted in ways that transcended physical tiredness. "How did you know?" she asked quietly. "About the baby. I didn't tell anyone. I've barely acknowledged it myself." Cole was silent for a long moment, his hand stilling on her back. When he spoke, his voice held something that might have been guilt. "I've been having you watched for the past 3 months. Tess's eyes snapped open. "What?" "Not constantly," Cole said quickly. "Not invasively. Just, I hired someone to check on you periodically, make sure you were safe, that you had what you needed, that nothing had gone catastrophically wrong." He paused. "I told myself it was just to ensure you were okay, that respecting your boundaries didn't mean abandoning you completely. You've been spying on me, Tess said, anger cutting through exhaustion. I've been protecting you from a distance, Cole corrected. And it's a damn good thing I did, because otherwise I wouldn't have known you were working yourself to death at this hotel. Wouldn't have known you'd lost dangerous amounts of weight. Wouldn't have been here tonight when you delivered scotch to my door. Wait, Tess said, processing his words with exhaustion slowed cognition. You knew I worked here. You requested this hotel specifically. I requested this suite specifically, Cole admitted. After my investigator reported you were working graveyard shifts, that you looked exhausted, that something was wrong. I wanted to see for myself. He stopped, jaw tightening. I wanted to confirm you were okay, that my distance hadn't been a mistake, that letting you go had been the right choice. And you discovered I wasn't okay at all, Tess said bitterly. I discovered you were pregnant and starving, Cole said bluntly. My investigator heard you talking to yourself 3 weeks ago. You were leaving work, walking to your apartment, and you were murmuring something about keeping the baby safe and needing to eat better and figuring out how to manage. She reported it immediately. Tess felt her face burn with humiliation. She did that sometimes when exhaustion overwhelmed her capacity for rational thought, talked to herself, worked through problems aloud because there was no one else to discuss them with. She'd thought she'd been alone on those walks home. Apparently she'd been wrong. So you've known for 3 weeks, Tess said. And you waited until now to what? Stage this confrontation? Force me into accepting help? I waited until I could control my response enough to be useful instead of destructive, Cole said. When I first found out you were pregnant and starving, I wanted to kick down your apartment door and drag you home by force. My investigator talked me down, reminded me that aggressive intervention would drive you further away, that I needed a better approach. So you arranged to be here tonight, Tess said, understanding clicking into place. You knew I'd be delivering to this suite. You planned this entire confrontation. I planned to see you, Cole corrected, to assess the situation personally, instead of through investigator reports, to determine if intervention was necessary or if I was overreacting. His voice hardened. What I discovered was worse than I'd imagined. You're not just pregnant and struggling, you're actively destroying yourself, and you're too proud to ask for help. Tess felt anger flash through her exhaustion. So you decided to take control, to eliminate my choices, to prove that I can't survive without you managing every aspect of my life. I decided to save you from yourself, Cole said. There's a difference. Is there? Tess challenged. Because from where I'm sitting, you're doing exactly what I was afraid of, making unilateral decisions about my future, taking over my life, eliminating my autonomy in the name of protection. Your autonomy was killing you, Cole said flatly. Your pride was endangering our child. So yes, I'm taking control. Because someone needs to make decisions that prioritize survival over independence. He moved to stand directly in front of her, his eyes burning with intensity. And Tess, I heard what you said to yourself on those walks home. Not just about the baby. About everything. Tess felt cold dread pool in her stomach. What do you mean? I mean, I know you talk to yourself when you think you're alone, Cole said quietly. I know you whisper about missing me, about regretting the divorce, about wondering if you made the right choice. I know you murmur about being scared and lonely and desperate. I know. His voice cracked slightly. I know you cry yourself to sleep most nights because the loneliness is unbearable. Tess stared at him, horror and humiliation warring in her chest. You had no right. I had every right, Cole said. You're carrying my child. That gives me the right to ensure you're both safe, even if that means invading privacy you claim to value. And what I discovered, Tess, is that your independence cost you everything that mattered. Connection, security, hope for a future that doesn't involve grinding yourself down until nothing remains. Stop, Tess whispered, unable to bear hearing her darkest moments reflected back by the one person she'd been trying to prove she didn't need. Please stop. I can't stop, Cole said. Because if I stop, if I back away and give you the space you claim to want, you'll continue destroying yourself. You'll keep working double shifts while pregnant. You'll keep eating ramen and toast. You'll keep pretending you're fine until your body gives out completely. He dropped to his knees in front of her again, his hands finding hers, holding them despite her attempt to pull away. I won't watch that happen. I won't respect boundaries that are killing you. I won't prioritize your pride over your survival. Tess was crying again, great heaving sobs that shook her entire frame. I didn't want you to see me like this. Didn't want you to know I'd failed so completely. Didn't want to admit I couldn't survive without you. You haven't failed, Cole said fiercely. You survived 4 years in circumstances that would have broken most people. You kept fighting even when it would have been easier to give up. You protected our child even while starving yourself. That's not failure, Tess. That's extraordinary strength applied to impossible circumstances. Then why does it feel like failure? Tess asked through tears. Why does accepting your help feel like admitting I was wrong about everything? Because pride is a terrible measure of success, Cole said. Because independence that destroys you isn't worth maintaining. Because loving someone enough to accept their help isn't weakness. It's the strength to acknowledge you can't do everything alone. He pulled her forward, wrapping his arms around her despite the awkward angle, holding her while she cried into his shoulder. And Tess, finally stripped of all defenses, all pride, all pretense, let herself be held by the man she'd spent 4 years running from, and 3 months secretly hoping would find her before she disappeared completely. I'm so scared, she whispered against his shoulder. Scared of losing myself in your world again. Scared of becoming someone who needs you so completely she can't function alone. Scared that accepting your protection means surrendering everything I fought for. Then we'll figure it out together, Cole said, his voice rough with emotion. We'll build something that respects your need for independence while acknowledging my need to keep you safe. We'll find balance between your autonomy and my protection. But Tess, he pulled back enough to look at her face, his hands framing her tear-stained cheeks. Right now, today, you need to let me take care of you. No conditions, no negotiations, no debates about long-term arrangements. Just acceptance that you're exhausted, pregnant, and in need of help that only I can provide. Tess nodded, too drained to argue, too desperate for safety to resist any longer. Okay, Cole. I surrender. Not surrender, Cole corrected gently. Trust. There's a difference. Then he kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her mouth, soft, careful, full of promise and apology and desperate relief. And Tess kissed him back, tasting salt from her own tears, feeling 4 years of loneliness begin to crack under the weight of finally not being alone anymore. Cole pulled his phone from the pocket of his silk robe, his movements precise and controlled, despite the emotion that had been vibrating through him moments before. He stepped away from Tess, creating physical distance that allowed him to shift back into command mode, the calculating businessman who built empires and eliminated obstacles with equal efficiency. Stay there, he told Tess, gesturing to the sofa where she sat wrapped in the hotel robe, looking small and fragile in ways that made his chest ache. Don't move until I say otherwise. He dialed a number from memory, the call connecting after 2 rings. Marcus, I need a medical team at the Hotel Monarch, Presidential Suite 4502, within 30 minutes. Private doctor, not hospital affiliated. Obstetric specialist if possible. Someone who understands discretion and doesn't ask unnecessary questions. He listened briefly. No. This isn't negotiable. I don't care what you have to pay or who you have to wake up. 30 minutes or find new employment. He ended the call and immediately dialed another number. Jennifer, I need you to clear out the guest wing of the penthouse immediately. Full restock toiletries, clothes in women's size 4, maternity clothes as well. I want it done within 2 hours. Budget is irrelevant. Pause. No, I'm not entertaining guests. This is personal. And Jennifer? Complete discretion or you're terminated. This conversation never happened. Tess watched him from the sofa, her eyes wide. Cole, you can't just... I can, Cole interrupted, dialing a 3rd number without looking at her. And I am. David, I need you to handle the resignation paperwork for a Hotel Monarch employee, Tess Walker, housekeeping, graveyard shift. Effective immediately. Medical reasons. Full severance package plus 6 months advance pay. Have it processed by morning. He paused. I don't care if it's irregular. Make it legal and make it happen. And David? The hotel management doesn't ask questions about why she's leaving or where she's going. Clear? He made 4 more calls in rapid succession to his driver, to his head of security, to his personal attorney, to someone whose function Tess couldn't determine from the brief, clipped conversation. Each call was delivered with the same absolute authority, the same expectation of immediate compliance, the same underlying message that obstacles would be eliminated and questions wouldn't be tolerated. This was Cole Hudson in his element, commanding resources, directing operations, solving problems through sheer force of will and unlimited financial backing. Tess had seen this version of him before during their marriage, usually from a distance, usually directed at business matters she wasn't privy to understanding. Seeing it deployed on her behalf was both terrifying and oddly comforting. When he finally set down the phone, Cole's attention returned to her with laser focus. Here's what's happening. A doctor will arrive within 30 minutes to examine you and the baby, ensure there are no immediate medical concerns from malnutrition or exhaustion. My car will arrive simultaneously to transport you to my penthouse. You're done working at this hotel. As of right now, your resignation is being processed. You'll receive severance and advance pay that should cover any outstanding debts. Your apartment lease will be terminated with appropriate notice and compensation. Your belongings will be packed and moved to my penthouse by tomorrow evening. Cole, Tess started. I'm not finished, Cole interrupted. You will stay in the guest wing of my penthouse with complete privacy and autonomy over that space. You will eat regular meals prepared by my staff according to nutritional requirements appropriate for pregnancy. You will receive regular medical care from obstetricians I trust. You will not work, will not stress yourself, will not do anything except rest and recover from 4 years of self-imposed destruction. He paused, his voice softening fractionally. And before you accuse me of controlling you, understand that these aren't negotiations. These are non-negotiable requirements for your survival and our child's well-being. Tess felt overwhelmed by the sheer scale of what he was orchestrating, by the speed with which he was dismantling her entire life and reconstructing it according to his specifications. You're taking over everything. My job, my apartment, my choices about my own future. How is that not control? It's control, Cole acknowledged without apology. But it's control applied to save you from circumstances that were destroying you. Would you prefer I respect your independence while you work yourself to death? That I honor your autonomy while you starve carrying my child? That I prioritize your pride over your survival? I'd prefer you give me some say in decisions that affect my life, Tess said, anger sparking through exhaustion. If you're still thinking about them, subscribe and become part of our story family. Your support is what keeps these emotional journeys alive. Comment where you're watching from. Let's share this experience together. You had 4 years to make decisions about your life, Cole said bluntly. And those decisions led you here too thin, too exhausted, pregnant and alone, delivering scotch to strangers at 3 a.m. So yes, I'm taking control, because your decision-making has proven catastrophically flawed. He moved back to the sofa, settling beside her close enough that she could feel his body heat. But Tess, understand something. This isn't about ownership. This isn't about eliminating your autonomy permanently. This is emergency triage. You're in crisis, and I'm implementing solutions that ensure immediate survival. We can discuss long-term arrangements later, when you're not starving and exhausted. What if I refuse? Tess asked, though her voice lacked conviction. What if I say no to all of this? Walk out that door, go back to my apartment and my job? Cole's expression went absolutely cold. Then I'll have you declared medically unfit to care for yourself. Petition for conservatorship based on your pregnancy and mental state, and ensure you receive appropriate care whether you consent or not. I won't let pride kill you, Tess. I won't let stubbornness destroy our child. I will do whatever is legally and ethically necessary to ensure your survival, even if that means overriding your wishes completely. Tess stared at him, seeing the absolute determination in every line of his body, understanding that he meant every word. That's terrifying. That's love, Cole corrected. Terrifying, overwhelming, uncompromising love that values your life over your pride. And I'm not apologizing for it. Before Tess could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Cole rose, checking the security viewer before opening it to admit a woman in her 50s carrying a medical bag, accompanied by Marcus Cole's head of security, a massive man who managed to look both professional and intimidating simultaneously. Dr. Chen, Cole said, stepping aside to let her enter. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Mr. Hudson. Dr. Chen's voice was professionally neutral, but her eyes were sharp as they assessed Tess on the sofa. I understand we have a patient requiring obstetric evaluation. Cole paused fractionally. Tess. She's approximately 3 months pregnant, malnourished, exhausted from extended periods of inadequate rest and nutrition. I need a complete assessment and recommendations for immediate care. Dr. Chen moved toward Tess with the efficient compassion of someone who'd seen everything and judged nothing. Hello, Tess. I'm Dr. Chen. I specialize in high-risk pregnancies. May I examine you? Tess nodded mutely, too overwhelmed to protest, too exhausted to resist the professional care being offered. Doctor. Chen conducted the examination with practiced efficiency, taking vital signs, asking questions about symptoms and medical history, performing an ultrasound with portable equipment that revealed the tiny, flickering heartbeat that Tess had only seen once before at a free clinic that had terrified her with talk of malnutrition risks and dangerous weight loss. "The baby's heartbeat is strong," Dr. Chen said, her voice holding cautious approval, "which is fortunate given your current condition. However, your blood pressure is low, you're showing signs of significant malnutrition, and your body is under considerable stress. If these conditions continue, you risk premature labor, developmental complications, or miscarriage." Tess felt tears threaten again. "What do I need to do?" "You need rest, proper nutrition, stress reduction, and regular medical monitoring," Dr. Chen said. "Mr. Hudson has outlined a care plan that, if followed, should allow for healthy pregnancy progression. But Tess," her voice gentled, "you need to understand that your body has been in survival mode for too long. Recovery will take time, and you'll need to prioritize your health over everything else for the foreseeable future." "She will," Cole said from across the room, his voice brooking no argument. "Whatever she needs, whatever resources are required, cost is irrelevant." Dr. Chen nodded, packing her equipment with efficient movements. "I'll send detailed care instructions and schedule weekly check-ins. Call me immediately if there are any concerning symptoms: bleeding, severe cramping, dizziness. Otherwise, I'll see you next week at Mr. Hudson's residence." After Dr. Chen and Marcus left, Tess sat in silence, processing everything that had happened in the past hour. Her entire life had been dismantled and reconstructed, while she sat helplessly watching, too tired to fight, too scared to resist the care being offered. "I don't know how to do this," she finally whispered. "Don't know how to accept help without losing myself. Don't know how to let you take care of me without becoming someone who can't function without you." Cole moved to sit beside her again, his arm coming around her shoulders in a gesture that was protective without being possessive. "Then we learn together. We figure out boundaries that work for both of us. We build something better than what we had before, something that respects your independence while acknowledging your current needs." He paused. "But Tess, right now, tonight, you just need to accept that you're safe, you're cared for, and you're not alone anymore. Can you do that?" Tess leaned into him, too exhausted to maintain distance, too desperate for comfort to resist the warmth he offered. "I can try. That's all I'm asking," Cole said. "Just try. Just let me protect you until you're strong enough to protect yourself again." And Tess, finally, let herself believe that accepting protection wasn't the same as surrendering autonomy, that needing help wasn't permanent weakness, that sometimes loving someone meant trusting them enough to let them save you when you couldn't save yourself. Cole's penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a building in the financial district, the kind of property that existed in a different economic atmosphere than normal people breathed. Tess had lived here during their marriage, had walked these halls and occupied these rooms with the casual comfort of someone who belonged. Now, arriving at 4:30 in the morning wrapped in a hotel robe over her maid's uniform, she felt like an intruder in a space that had once been home. The driver had delivered them via private garage, avoiding lobby cameras and curious eyes. Marcus had accompanied them, maintaining professional distance while radiating the particular vigilance of someone whose job was eliminating threats before they materialized. Now they stood in the penthouse's entry hall, all marble and recessed lighting, and Tess felt overwhelmingly small. "The guest wing is ready," Cole said, guiding her past the formal living spaces toward a corridor she remembered led to guest bedrooms they'd rarely used. "Complete privacy, your own bathroom, sitting area. You're not obligated to interact with me or my staff beyond what's necessary for your care." He was giving her space, establishing boundaries, trying to prove this wasn't captivity despite having orchestrated her entire life's upheaval in under 2 hours. Tess should have felt grateful. Instead, she felt exhausted and overwhelmed and bizarrely disappointed that he was maintaining distance after everything that had happened. The guest suite was beautiful, decorated in soft neutrals with comfortable furniture, ensuite bathroom with soaking tub, sitting area with windows overlooking the city. Someone had already stocked the closet with clothes in her size, the bathroom with high-end toiletries, the bedside table with bottles of prenatal vitamins and calcium supplements. "Jennifer works fast," Tess observed, running her fingers over silk pajamas that probably cost more than her weekly paycheck. "Jennifer is extremely well compensated for discretion and efficiency," Cole said. He stood in the doorway, not entering the space he'd designated as hers, respecting boundaries he'd imposed. "There's food in the refrigerator in the kitchenette, small meals you can eat throughout the day. Dr. Chen's instructions are on the counter. My bedroom is at the other end of the penthouse if you need anything, but staff will check on you regularly." "You're giving me space," Tess said. "I'm giving you what you asked for," Cole corrected. Independence within safety, autonomy within protection, the ability to rest and recover without feeling controlled or monitored. What if I don't want space? The words came out before Tess could stop them, exhaustion eliminating the filter between thought and speech. Cole's expression shifted, something heating in his eyes that he quickly controlled. Tess, you're exhausted, emotional, vulnerable. This isn't the time to make decisions about what? Tess interrupted. About whether I want to be alone in this beautiful suite while you maintain noble distance? About whether I'm capable of knowing what I need? About us, Cole said quietly. About whether what you're feeling right now is genuine or just reaction to crisis, relief at being rescued, gratitude masquerading as something else. You think I don't know my own feelings? Tess challenged. I think you're 3 months pregnant, severely malnourished, exhausted from working double shifts, and processing emotional trauma from 4 years of isolation, Cole said. I think you're in no condition to make clear-headed decisions about relationships, about us, about anything beyond rest and recovery. So you're protecting me from myself, Tess said. Again. I'm protecting us both from decisions we might regret, Cole corrected. He moved into the room finally, stopping a careful distance from where she stood. Tess, I want you. I've wanted you every day for 4 years. Never stopped wanting you despite the divorce, despite respecting your boundaries, despite everything that said I should move on. But I won't take advantage of your vulnerable state. Won't let physical proximity and emotional intensity trick us both into believing we can just resume where we left off. What if I don't want to resume where we left off? Tess asked. What if I want something different, something better, something that acknowledges we're different people than we were 4 years ago? Cole was quiet for a long moment. Then we build that, slowly, carefully. When you're not exhausted and starving and dependent on me for basic survival. When you have the strength to walk away if that's what you choose. When I'm confident you're staying because you want to, not because you have no other options. That could take months, Tess said. Then it takes months, Cole said. I've waited 4 years, Tess. I can wait however long is necessary to ensure that whatever we build is real, sustainable, and built on genuine choice, rather than circumstantial necessity. Tess stared at him, seeing the restraint evident in every line of his body, the desire he was ruthlessly controlling, the careful distance he was maintaining despite everything they'd both admitted tonight. You're different, she said quietly, than you were during our marriage, more controlled, more careful with me. I learned, Cole said simply, learned that controlling you drove you away, learned that protection without autonomy is just another form of captivity, learned that loving someone means respecting their needs even when those needs conflict with your desires. He paused. I won't make the same mistakes twice, Tess. Won't push for more than you're ready to give. Won't assume that wanting you gives me rights to you. What if I want you to assume those rights? Tess asked, moving closer to him, too tired to maintain her own distance, too desperate for connection to accept his noble restraint. Then ask me clearly when you're rested and fed, and thinking rationally, Cole said, though his hands had moved to her waist almost unconsciously, steadying her, holding her. Ask me when accepting me isn't your only option, when staying with me is genuine choice rather than survival necessity. And if I ask you then, Tess pressed, if I tell you in 3 months or 6 months that I choose you, that I want to try again, that I'm ready to build something new, what happens? Cole's eyes darkened, his hands tightening fractionally on her waist. Then I claim you completely. Then I stop being noble and restrained and careful. Then I show you exactly how much I've wanted you for 4 years while respecting distance you demanded. His voice had gone rough, control slipping despite his best efforts. But Tess, you need to understand something. If we try again, if we build something new, I won't let you run when it gets difficult. Won't accept another 4 years of silence because you're afraid. Won't tolerate pride that nearly killed you. We'll fight, we'll disagree, we'll struggle with boundaries and control and all the ways we trigger each other. But we stay. We work through it. We build something that survives difficulty instead of collapsing at the first sign of trouble. That's terrifying, Tess whispered. That's commitment, Cole corrected. Real, permanent commitment that doesn't dissolve when circumstances get complicated. And I need to know you're capable of that before we try again. Tess leaned forward, resting her forehead against his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath expensive fabric, feeling his heat surrounding her like a promise. I don't know if I'm capable of that. Don't know if I'm brave enough to try again, if I can trust myself not to run when fear overwhelms rational thought. Then we wait until you know, Cole said, his arms coming around her properly now, holding her with the same careful restraint that characterized everything he'd done tonight. We wait until you're certain, until fear doesn't control your decisions, until staying with me is what you want, rather than what you need for survival. You're very noble, Tess said against his chest. I'm very selfish, Cole corrected. I'm ensuring that when you choose me, if you choose me, it's real and permanent. That I'm not just the man who saved you when you couldn't save yourself. That what we build is strong enough to survive the inevitable difficulties rather than collapsing when you remember why you left in the first place. Tess pulled back to look at his face, seeing the vulnerability beneath the control, the desperate hope he was trying to manage with rational planning. What if I already know? What if 4 years of loneliness and 3 months of terror have already taught me that pride isn't worth the cost? That independence that destroys you isn't really freedom? Then you'll still know in 3 months, Cole said firmly. And if you do, if you're certain, if you ask me, then I'll give you everything. No reservations, no restraint, no holding back. But right now, tonight, you need rest more than you need answers about us. He was right. Tess could feel exhaustion pulling at her like a physical weight, demanding surrender to sleep her body desperately needed. But accepting rest meant accepting distance, meant spending the night alone in this beautiful guest suite while Cole maintained careful boundaries in his separate bedroom. Stay, she said impulsively. Not for anything sexual, not to resume our relationship. Just stay. I don't want to be alone tonight. Don't want to wake up tomorrow and discover this was all a dream, and I'm back in my apartment with nothing but ramen and loneliness. Cole hesitated, wrestling with competing impulses. Desire to give her what she asked, versus concern about blurring boundaries he'd carefully established. Tess, please, Tess whispered. I've been alone for 4 years, Cole. I've slept in empty beds in empty apartments with no one to talk to, no one to hold me, no one to make the loneliness bearable. Just tonight, just once. Let me not be alone. Cole's resistance crumbled. Okay, tonight. But I'm sleeping on top of the covers, fully dressed, and if you change your mind, you tell me immediately, and I leave. Clear? Clear, Tess agreed. She changed into the silk pajamas someone had thoughtfully provided, used the bathroom with its expensive toiletries, brushed her teeth with a toothbrush still in its packaging. When she emerged, Cole had dimmed the lights and was settling on top of the covers as promised, still wearing his silk pajama pants and robe. Tess climbed under the covers, the sheets softer than anything she'd slept in for months, the mattress perfectly firm, the pillows exactly right. She turned toward Cole, close enough to feel his warmth without touching, close enough that his presence eliminated the crushing loneliness that had been her constant companion. Thank you, she whispered. For tonight. For everything. For not giving up on me even when I gave up on myself. I never gave up on you, Cole said quietly. Never stopped hoping you'd come back. Never stopped believing we could build something better than what we had before. What if we can't? Tess asked. What if we try again and it fails? What if I run again? What if we're just not compatible in ways we can't overcome? Then we fail honestly, Cole said. But Tess, I don't think we'll fail. I think we've both learned enough to build something better. I think 4 years apart taught us what actually matters. What's worth fighting for? What's worth the risk? Tess closed her eyes, feeling sleep pulling her under with irresistible force. I missed you. Every day for 4 years, I missed you. Even when I was determined to prove I didn't need you, I missed you. I know, Cole said softly. I heard you tell yourself that on those late-night walks home. Heard you cry about it in your apartment when you thought no one was listening. I know, Tess. And I missed you too. She was asleep before she could respond. Exhaustion finally claiming victory, pulling her into darkness where loneliness couldn't follow and fear couldn't reach. And Cole stayed, exactly as he'd promised, watching over her while she slept, ensuring that for the first time in 4 years, Tess Walker wasn't alone. Tess woke to sunlight streaming through windows she didn't recognize, wrapped in sheets too expensive to belong to her apartment, surrounded by warmth and safety she hadn't felt in years. For 3 disoriented seconds, she panicked, unable to remember where she was, how she'd gotten here, whether this was real or another dream that would dissolve into the harsh reality of her studio apartment with its broken heater and thin walls. Then memory returned in a rush. The hotel, Cole, the confrontation, the confession, the carefully negotiated boundaries that had ended with her begging him to stay, to not leave her alone, to just be present without demands or expectations. She turned her head to find the space beside her empty, Cole's absence marked by rumpled covers and a note propped on the pillow. She reached for it with hands that still trembled slightly, unfolding paper that smelled faintly of his cologne. Tess, you slept for 11 hours. Dr. Chen said you'd need extensive rest. There's breakfast in the kitchenette. Eat slowly, small amounts. I'm in my office if you need me, but no obligation to seek me out. Rest, recover. We'll talk when you're ready. See. 11 hours. Tess tried to remember the last time she'd slept that long uninterrupted. Couldn't recall anything recent. At the hotel, sleep had come in fragmented 4-hour blocks between shifts, never enough to truly rest, never sufficient to overcome the bone-deep exhaustion that had become her constant state. She sat up slowly, her body protesting movement with aches that suggested even 11 hours hadn't been enough. The clock on the nightstand read 3:47 p.m. She'd slept away most of a day. The kitchenette Cole mentioned was actually a full kitchen, smaller than the penthouse's main one but perfectly appointed. The refrigerator held containers labeled in neat script scrambled eggs, fresh fruit, whole grain toast, yogurt, protein shakes. All small portions? All foods appropriate for someone whose stomach needed to relearn how to handle nutrition. Tess ate mechanically, sitting at the small table positioned near windows overlooking the city 45 floors below. From here, she could see the Hotel Monarch in the distance, could identify the floor where she'd been working just hours ago. The life she'd been living looked impossibly small from this height, impossibly desperate, impossibly difficult to maintain. She'd been killing herself slowly. Dr. Chen had been diplomatic about it, but the message was clear: continue for another month and she'd risk miscarriage, continue for 3 months and she'd risk her own survival. Pride had nearly destroyed her and the baby she was carrying. Pride and stubborn determination to prove she didn't need Cole Hudson's protection. A knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting staff. Cole entered, dressed casually in dark jeans and a gray sweater, his hair slightly messed in ways that suggested he'd been running his hands through it, a tell she remembered from their marriage, a sign he was stressed despite his controlled exterior. "You're awake," he said, stopping just inside the doorway, maintaining careful distance. "Did you eat?" "Some," Tess confirmed. "The eggs and fruit. Couldn't manage much more." "That's fine," Cole said. "Small amounts frequently. Dr. Chen emphasized that your stomach needs time to adjust." He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "Can I sit?" "It's your penthouse," Tess pointed out. "It's your space right now," Cole corrected. "I won't intrude without permission." "You can sit," Tess said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "I'm not fragile, Cole. I don't need to be handled with excessive care." "You're 3 months pregnant and recovering from severe malnutrition," Cole said, settling into the indicated chair. "I think excessive care is exactly what you need." He paused. "But I'm trying to balance care with respect for your autonomy, trying not to recreate the dynamics that drove you away." Tess studied him, seeing the effort evident in his careful distance, his measured words, his obvious restraint. "You're different than you were during our marriage, more aware of boundaries, more conscious of giving me space." "I had 4 years to think about what went wrong," Cole said. 4 years to analyze every conversation, every decision, every moment where I prioritized protection over your agency. I learned, Tess, learned that controlling you was easier than trusting you, that protecting you felt safer than giving you freedom to risk yourself. But that control drove you away, and I lost everything that mattered because I couldn't accept that loving someone means letting them make their own choices, even when those choices terrify you. "And now?" Tess asked. "Now that you've learned all that, now that you understand what drove me away, what happens?" "Now I'm trying to build something better," Cole said. "Something that respects your independence while acknowledging your current needs. Something that gives you agency while ensuring you're safe. It's..." He stopped, frustration flashing across his features. "It's extremely difficult to execute. Every instinct I have screams at me to control everything, to eliminate risks before they materialize, to make decisions that prioritize your safety over your autonomy. But I'm trying to resist those instincts because I know they'll drive you away again." "What if I don't want you to resist them?" Tess asked quietly. "What if I've learned that my fierce independence was actually self-destructive isolation? What if 4 years taught me that accepting protection isn't the same as losing myself?" Cole's eyes darkened, his hands tightening on the armrests. "Then you need to be very clear about that. Need to tell me explicitly what you want, what you need, what boundaries you're comfortable with. Because, Tess, if you give me permission to protect you fully, if you tell me you're ready to accept what I can offer, I won't hold back. Won't maintain this careful distance. Won't spend every interaction wrestling with restraint. What would that look like? Tess asked. Full protection without restraint? It would look like me claiming you completely, Cole said, his voice dropping lower, rougher. It would look like me ensuring you never work another job that destroys you, never worry about rent or food or basic survival again. It would look like me rebuilding what we had but better with communication and honesty and acknowledgement of what went wrong before. It would look like me being your husband again, properly this time, without the control issues that poisoned our first attempt. We're divorced, Tess pointed out. Paperwork, Cole dismissed. Easily remedied if that's what you want. If you're ready to try again. To build something permanent rather than temporary. Tess felt her heart hammering against her ribs. This is too fast. Yesterday I was delivering scotch in a maid's uniform. Today I'm discussing remarriage. It's overwhelming. Then we slow down, Cole said immediately. Then I back off, give you space, stop pushing for clarity about what comes next. You rest, recover, we figure out the relationship dynamics later when you're not exhausted and emotionally overwhelmed. No, Tess said, surprising herself. No, I don't want to slow down. Don't want more space. Don't want you backing off and giving me time to overthink everything until fear convinces me to run again. She stood, moving around the table to where he sat, seeing his eyes track her movement with predatory focus. I want you to stop being noble and restrained. Want you to claim me the way you said you would. Want to stop pretending we can just be friendly ex-spouses cohabitating for the baby's sake. Cole stood slowly, his height and breadth suddenly overwhelming in the small space. Tess, you're emotional, vulnerable. I'm clear-headed and certain, Tess interrupted. I'm telling you what I want. I'm asking you to stop protecting me from myself and start being what I actually need, not a careful friend who maintains distance, but the husband I was too afraid to keep 4 years ago. If we do this, Cole said, his control visibly fracturing, if I claim you now while you're still recovering, still dependent on me for basic survival, you can't run when it gets difficult, can't use fear as an excuse to leave again. Can't decide in 3 months that independence matters more than us, and disappear into another 4 years of silence. I won't run, Tess said, the promise falling from her lips before fear could intercept it. I've learned that running solves nothing, that isolation nearly killed me, that pride is worthless if you're too broken to enjoy it. Then come here, Cole said, his voice rough with barely restrained need. Close enough to touch, close enough that there's no ambiguity about what happens next. Tess stepped forward, closing the distance between them until she could feel his body heat, until his hands found her waist with possession that made her breath catch. I'm here. Now what? Now I claim what's mine, Cole said, and kissed her with 4 years of restrained desire finally unleashed, with hunger and desperation and overwhelming relief that she was finally choosing him willingly rather than accepting him out of necessity. Tess kissed him back with equal intensity, her hands fisting in his sweater, pulling him closer, accepting his claim and making her own. And somewhere between desperate kisses and whispered promises, she understood that this wasn't the same relationship they'd had before. This was better, built on honest need rather than fearful independence, built on mutual choice rather than circumstantial necessity, built on 4 years of painful lessons that taught them both what actually mattered. Tell me you're mine, Cole demanded against her mouth. Say it clearly so there's no confusion later. I'm yours, Tess whispered. Completely, permanently, yours. No more running, no more pride, no more pretending I'm better off alone. And I'm yours, Cole said fiercely. To protect, to cherish, to build a life with that respects who you are, while keeping you safe. No more control for control's sake. No more decisions made without your input. No more treating protection like possession. They sealed the promise with another kiss, deeper this time, full of commitment and hope and desperate relief that they'd somehow found each other again despite 4 years of mistakes and miscommunication. And Tess finally let herself believe that accepting love wasn't the same as losing herself, that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was admit you needed someone, that true strength came from building partnerships rather than maintaining isolation, that love without trust and communication wasn't really love at all. They had work to do, conversations to have, boundaries to negotiate. But for now, in this moment, wrapped in each other's arms, in a penthouse high above a city where she'd almost destroyed herself, Tess chose to believe that second chances were possible, that people could learn and grow and build something better from the wreckage of what had failed before. And for the first time in 4 years, choosing hope didn't feel like weakness. It felt like coming home. 3 days later, Tess had settled into a routine that felt almost normal, if you ignored the luxury surrounding her and the fact that she was living with her ex-husband while pregnant with his child. She spent mornings eating carefully portioned meals, afternoons resting or reading in the suite Cole had designated as hers, evenings having dinner with him where they talked carefully around the enormous questions about their future that neither seemed ready to fully address. It was civilized, polite, increasingly unbearable. Cole maintained his careful distance despite the kiss they'd shared, despite her confession that she didn't want space, despite everything suggesting they were dancing around inevitable reunion. He was being noble again, giving her time to recover before discussing permanent arrangements, ensuring she wasn't making decisions based on gratitude or emotional vulnerability. It was considerate and respectful and driving Tess slowly insane. She was in the sitting area of her suite, pretending to read a book, but actually listening to Cole's voice carrying from his office down the hall. He'd been on calls all morning, his voice carrying that particular edge that meant serious business was being conducted. Decisions were being made that affected significant amounts of money or territorial arrangements, or whatever it was his organization actually did. Tess had learned not to ask too many questions during their marriage. Now, listening from a distance, she found herself wondering if that lack of curiosity had been part of what went wrong. Her refusal to understand his world, her determination to remain separate from activities she found morally questionable. His voice rose slightly, audible enough that she could make out words. "Not acceptable, James. I told you 6 months ago that expansion into Newark was worth the risk. The infrastructure is solid, the returns are projected at 40% annually, and the political connections are already established." A pause, presumably James responding with objections Tess couldn't hear. "I understand the timeline is aggressive," Cole continued, "but that's exactly why the opportunity exists. Smaller operations can't move fast enough to capitalize. We can. We have the resources, the personnel, the capital to execute before competitors recognize what we're doing." Another pause. Tess could picture Cole in his office, leaning back in his leather chair, fingers steepled, expression controlled despite whatever frustration he was feeling. "No," Cole said, and his voice had shifted to something absolute. "No, James, we're not proceeding. Cancel the acquisition, return the deposits. Inform our partners that we're withdrawing from the Newark expansion entirely." Tess set down her book, her attention fully captured now. Cole didn't cancel major acquisitions. She'd been married to him long enough to know that once he committed to business expansion, he followed through with relentless determination. Backing out mid-negotiation suggested something catastrophic had changed. "Because the risk assessment has changed," Cole said, answering a question Tess couldn't hear. "Because circumstances have evolved that make this expansion untenable regardless of potential returns. Because," he stopped, and when he spoke again, his voice held something that might have been vulnerability beneath the business efficiency. "Because I'm busy, James. I'm busy taking care of my wife, Tess, and my heir, and that takes absolute priority over every business opportunity, every expansion plan, every acquisition that might require my focus to be divided." Tess's breath caught. Wife. He'd called her his wife to his business associate, despite the divorce, despite their carefully maintained separate spaces, despite everything suggesting they were still figuring out what came next. "I don't care about the losses," Cole continued. "I don't care that we've invested 6 months of planning into this expansion. I don't care that backing out now damages our reputation with partners who were counting on our participation. None of that matters compared to ensuring Tess and the baby are safe, healthy, protected." A pause. "Yes, I'm serious. Yes, this is permanent, not temporary. Yes, you need to restructure our entire operational approach based on my reduced availability. Figure it out, James. That's what I pay you for." He ended the call with definitive finality, and Tess heard his office chair creak. He was standing, probably pacing, processing whatever decision he'd just made. She sat frozen in her chair, trying to understand what she'd just overheard. Cole Hudson, who'd built his organization through aggressive expansion and calculated risk-taking, had just canceled a major acquisition because it would divide his attention from her, had just told his second-in-command that she and the baby took absolute priority over business opportunities, had just restructured his entire operational approach around being present for her. That wasn't the Cole she'd been married to 4 years ago. That Cole had prioritized business constantly, had taken calls at dinner, had disappeared for days on business trips he couldn't discuss. That Cole had loved her but had never suggested that love should override professional obligations. This Cole was different. Genuinely, fundamentally different in ways she was only beginning to understand. Tess stood, moving toward the doorway of her suite, drawn by something she couldn't fully name. She found Cole in the hallway, leaning against the wall outside his office, one hand pressed to his forehead like he was fighting off a headache. "I heard," Tess said quietly. Cole's head snapped up, his eyes finding hers with laser focus. "You weren't supposed to. Your voice carries when you're angry," Tess said, "and these walls aren't as thick as you think." She moved closer, drawn by something in his expression, vulnerability mixed with determination, exhaustion mixed with absolute certainty. "You canceled the Newark expansion. Because of me. Because of us," Cole corrected. "Because I finally learned that building empires means nothing if I lose what actually matters while doing it. Because I'd rather have smaller operations and more time with you than massive expansion that requires me to be absent." "That expansion was worth millions," Tess said. "I remember you discussing it before the divorce. You said it was the most significant opportunity in 5 years, that it would establish you in new territory, that it would require me to be in Newark 3 days a week for the next 6 months, Cole interrupted. "It would mean late nights and constant crisis management and attention divided between business and you. And I'm not doing that again, Tess. I'm not repeating the mistakes that drove you away the first time. But I'm not asking you to give up your business," Tess protested. "I'm not demanding you restructure everything around me. I just want—" "What do you want?" Cole asked, moving closer, his eyes searching her face. "Tell me clearly, Tess. Because I'm trying to balance giving you space with showing you I'm serious about prioritizing us. And apparently I'm executing that balance poorly if you're concerned I'm sacrificing too much. I want you to build the empire you're meant to build," Tess said. "I want you to take the opportunities that matter, to expand your operations, to be the man I married who commanded respect and loyalty through strategic brilliance. But Cole," she paused, trying to find words for the fear that had driven her away, "I also want you to come home, to be present when you're here instead of constantly managing crises from your office, to prioritize us enough that I don't spend every dinner wondering if you're really listening or just calculating your next business move." "Then that's what I'll do," Cole said simply. "I'll build smaller, smarter operations that don't require constant crisis management. I'll delegate more effectively, trust my people to handle expansion without my micromanagement. I'll be present when I'm home instead of letting business consume every waking moment." He reached for her, his hands framing her face with gentleness that seemed at odds with the powerful man who'd just canceled millions in potential revenue. "But Tess, understand something. Every choice I make from this point forward prioritizes you and our child. Every opportunity gets evaluated based on whether it's compatible with being the husband and father I should have been the first time. And if that means smaller empire, reduced expansion, less aggressive growth, that's a trade I'll make without hesitation." Tess felt tears threaten, overwhelmed by the enormity of what he was offering. "What if you resent me for it later? What if you wake up in 5 years and realize you sacrificed your potential for a relationship that might have failed anyway?" "Then I'll still have our child," Cole said. "I'll still have built something that matters more than territory or revenue or reputation. And I'll know I prioritized correctly, even if it didn't work out exactly as planned." He leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers, close enough that she could feel his breath against her skin. "I've spent 4 years regretting what I lost, Tess. I'm not spending the next 4 decades regretting what I failed to build because I was too focused on business to be present for my family." "You're sure?" Tess whispered. "I've never been more certain of anything," Cole said. "You're what matters. You and our child. Everything else is just—" He paused, searching for words. "Just noise. Important noise. Profitable noise. But ultimately noise compared to having you safe and present and building a life with me." Tess closed her eyes, feeling the last of her resistance crumble under the weight of his absolute conviction. Okay, Cole. If you're certain this is what you want, this is what I need," Cole corrected. "And what you deserve. And what our child needs, parents who are present, committed, building something sustainable rather than chasing endless expansion at the cost of everything else." He kissed her then, soft and careful, full of promise and commitment and the kind of desperate hope that came from getting unexpected second chances at relationships you thought you'd destroyed. And Tess kissed him back, finally accepting that sometimes love required sacrifice, that prioritizing family over empire wasn't weakness, that the man who'd canceled millions in expansion to be present for her was exactly the partner she'd needed all along but had been too afraid to ask for. They had details to work out, conversations to have, boundaries to negotiate as they figured out how to rebuild a marriage that had failed spectacularly the first time. But standing in the hallway of a penthouse where she'd once lived as his wife, wrapped in his arms while he promised to prioritize her over everything else he'd built, Tess finally believed that second chances weren't just possible, they were real. And they were theirs if they were brave enough to claim them. That evening, Cole canceled his remaining business meetings for the week and ordered dinner from a restaurant Tess remembered loving during their marriage, an intimate Italian place that made fresh pasta and didn't deliver to just anyone, but apparently made exceptions for Cole Hudson. They ate in the penthouse's formal dining room, the space feeling less enormous with just the two of them, the city lights glittering 45 floors below, creating a backdrop that felt almost romantic. "Tell me about the baby," Cole said, setting down his fork to give her his complete attention. "Everything I don't know yet. How you found out, what you've been feeling, what you've been thinking about the future." Tess took a careful sip of water, organizing thoughts she'd been processing alone for 3 months. "I found out 8 weeks ago. I'd been exhausted, nauseous, and I kept telling myself it was just stress from working double shifts. But when I missed my second period, I couldn't ignore it anymore." She paused, remembering the panic of taking that test in the employee bathroom during her break, seeing the positive result and having no one to tell, no one to share the terror and wonder with. "I took the test at the hotel, bought it at a pharmacy on my walk home, couldn't wait until I got to my apartment. Just needed to know immediately." "And when you saw the result?" Cole asked quietly. "I was terrified," Tess admitted. "Completely, overwhelmingly terrified. Because I was barely surviving on my own, could barely afford to feed myself, and suddenly I was responsible for another life I had no idea how to protect." Tears pricked her eyes at the memory. "I sat in that bathroom stall for 20 minutes trying to figure out what to do, whether to tell you, whether to try to manage alone, whether I was even capable of being a mother when I couldn't manage my own survival." Cole's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists on the table. "You went through that alone, made those calculations alone, carried that terror alone for 3 months. "I didn't know what else to do," Tess said. "We were divorced. You'd moved on, or so I thought. Showing up pregnant seemed like," she struggled for words, "like manipulation. Like using the baby to force you back into my life when you'd respected my boundaries for 4 years. I was ashamed, Cole. Ashamed I couldn't provide properly. Ashamed I'd failed at independence so spectacularly. Ashamed I was about to become a mother while working as a hotel maid. You should have told me immediately," Cole said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "The moment you found out, you should have called me. I would have..." He stopped, seeming to wrestle with overwhelming feelings. "I would have been there, would have helped, would have ensured you never spent 3 months terrified and alone trying to figure out how to survive." "I know that now," Tess said. "But 3 months ago, 8 weeks pregnant and exhausted and scared, all I could think about was that I'd chosen independence, and now I had to live with the consequences. That asking for help meant admitting failure, admitting I'd been wrong about everything, admitting I needed exactly what I'd run away from." Cole stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, pacing to the windows with movements that suggested barely contained fury. Not at her, she realized, but at circumstances, at his own ignorance, at the 3 months she'd suffered unnecessarily. "I should have known sooner. Should have had someone watching you more closely. Should have intervened earlier. 3 months, Tess. 3 months you carried my child while starving, while working yourself to exhaustion, while terrified and alone. That's," his voice cracked, "that's unacceptable." "You didn't know," Tess said, standing and moving toward him. "You respected my boundaries, gave me the space I'd demanded. You can't blame yourself for honoring what I'd asked for." "I can blame myself for not recognizing sooner that your boundaries were destroying you," Cole said, turning to face her. "For not intervening when my investigator first reported concerns about your weight loss and exhaustion, for waiting 3 weeks after learning about the baby to orchestrate a meeting instead of kicking down your door the moment I found out. If you'd kicked down my door, I would have run," Tess pointed out. "I would have seen it as the control I was afraid of, the possessiveness I'd fled from. Your investigator was right. Aggressive intervention would have driven me further away. You needed me to see for myself that I couldn't survive alone. Needed me to choose you rather than having you force yourself back into my life." Cole moved closer, his hands reaching for her waist, pulling her against him with possession that made her breath catch. "No more running. No more 3-month silences, while you process terror alone. No more independence that nearly destroys you. From this moment forward, Tess, you tell me when you're scared, when you're struggling, when you need help. Clear?" "Clear," Tess whispered, her hands resting against his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath expensive fabric. "But Cole, that means you tell me things too. About your business, about dangers I should know about, about the world you operate in that I refused to understand before. No more keeping me separate from reality to protect me from things you think will scare me. That's terrifying, Cole said. Letting you see everything, letting you understand the full scope of what I do, risking that you'll be horrified and run again. That's trust, Tess corrected, echoing his words from days ago. Real trust that doesn't compartmentalize, that doesn't hide difficult truths, that treats me like an adult capable of handling complexity, instead of a child who needs protection from reality. Cole was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. If I show you everything, if I'm completely honest about my operations, about the gray areas and moral ambiguities, you might realize you can't live with it, might decide that understanding my world is worse than fearing it from a distance. Then I'll tell you that, Tess said firmly, and we'll figure out what compromises are possible, what boundaries we need, what I can accept, and what's too much. But Cole, I'd rather know and struggle with it than remain ignorant and terrified of invisible threats I'm inventing in my imagination. Okay, Cole said, the word carrying weight of enormous concession. Okay, Tess, complete honesty, full transparency, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it reveals things you might not want to know. We build this on truth instead of comfortable lies. Complete honesty, Tess agreed. Then, gathering courage, she asked the question that had been building since the hallway conversation earlier. Starting with this, when you called me your wife to James earlier, when you told him I was your absolute priority, did you mean that? Or was it just easier than explaining our complicated situation? Cole's eyes darkened, his hands tightening on her waist. I meant it. Every word. You're my wife, Tess. The divorce papers don't change that. Don't eliminate what exists between us. You've always been my wife. Even when you weren't living with me. Even when you were determined to prove you didn't need me. The paperwork was just, he paused, searching for words, just a legal technicality that I tolerated because you demanded it. But it never changed how I saw you, how I felt about you, what you are to me. We're divorced, Tess said, but her voice lacked conviction. We're separated, Cole corrected. Temporarily, artificially separated by your fear and my control issues. But the bond between us that never broke, Tess, not in 4 years of silence. Not through your determination to prove independence. Not through anything. You're mine. I'm yours. And legal paperwork doesn't change that fundamental truth. So what are you saying? Tess asked, her heart hammering. That we're still married despite the divorce? That the past 4 years don't count? I'm saying the past 4 years taught us what we needed to learn to make this work properly, Cole said. I'm saying I'm done pretending we're just ex-spouses cohabitating for convenience. I'm saying I want you back completely, permanently, legally and emotionally, and every other way that matters. He paused, vulnerability flashing across his features. I'm saying marry me again, Tess, properly this time, with full understanding of who we both are, what we both need, what mistakes we won't repeat. Marry me and let me be the husband I should have been the first time. Tess felt tears threaten, felt the enormity of what he was asking crash over her. Cole, we've only been back together for 3 days. We're still figuring out basic boundaries. We haven't even discussed. I don't need time to know what I want, Cole interrupted. I've had 4 years to know what I want. 4 years of regretting what I lost, what I failed to protect, what I drove away through my own inability to balance love with control. I know exactly what I want, Tess. The question is whether you're ready to want it too. I'm terrified, Tess admitted. Terrified we'll repeat the same mistakes. Terrified your world will swallow me again. Terrified I'll run when it gets difficult because that's what I do when fear overwhelms rational thought. Then we'll be terrified together, Cole said. We'll build something strong enough to survive fear, something honest enough to survive difficulty. We'll communicate instead of hiding. We'll fight productively instead of letting resentment build. We'll choose each other every day instead of assuming the relationship will maintain itself. He pulled her closer until their bodies were pressed together, until she could feel every plane and angle of him against her. But I need to know, Tess. I need to know if you're capable of staying, of committing, of choosing us, even when it's hard. Because I can't survive another 4 years of silence. Can't survive you running again when things get complicated. Tess stared up at him, seeing the desperate vulnerability beneath his controlled exterior, seeing how much this was costing him to ask, seeing how much her answer mattered to him, and she realized that fear wasn't a good enough reason to refuse, that protecting herself from potential pain meant guaranteeing current loneliness, that sometimes love required courage to risk everything on someone who might hurt you. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you again. I'll commit completely, permanently, terrifyingly. I'll stay when it gets hard. I'll communicate instead of running. I'll build something with you that's strong enough to survive our worst impulses. Cole's expression transformed relief and joy, an overwhelming emotion flooding through his controlled facade. Say it again. I need to hear it again. I'll marry you, Tess said, louder this time, more certain. I'll be your wife, properly this time, with full understanding of what that means. I'll build a life with you that respects who we both are while acknowledging what we both need. Cole kissed her before she could finish, his mouth claiming hers with desperate intensity, with 4 years of restrained desire finally unleashed completely. And Tess kissed him back with equal hunger, accepting his claim and making her own, surrendering to connection she'd been fighting for too long. Mine, Cole said against her mouth, his hands moving possessively over her body, relearning territory he'd been denied for years. My wife, the mother of my child, mine to protect, to cherish, to build a life with. Say you understand that. I understand, Tess breathed. I'm yours, completely. No more running, no more doubting, no more letting fear control decisions. And I'm yours, Cole said fiercely. To trust with truth, to depend on for protection, to build something with that's better than what we had before. We're doing this right, Tess. Building something permanent, something real, something that survives difficulty instead of collapsing. He lifted her suddenly, his arms beneath her knees and back, carrying her with the same ease he'd demonstrated years ago during their first marriage. Tess wrapped her arms around his neck, accepting being carried, accepting his strength, accepting that needing him wasn't the same as losing herself. Where are we going? She asked. To bed, Cole said bluntly. To my bed, in my room, where you belong. We're done with separate spaces, done with careful distance, done with pretending we're not desperate for each other. Cole, I'm pregnant and exhausted and we're not having sex tonight, Cole interrupted. You're too tired, too newly recovered, but you're sleeping in my bed, in my arms, where I can ensure you're safe and protected, and not alone, where I can wake up with you beside me and confirm this isn't another dream, where I find you and then lose you again. He carried her through the penthouse, past her carefully appointed guest suite, past the formal living spaces, to the master bedroom she remembered from their marriage. It was exactly as she remembered: massive bed, floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture that projected controlled power, but it felt different now, less like a space that excluded her and more like a sanctuary they'd build together. Cole set her down carefully on the bed, then moved to close the door with deliberate finality. The heavy lock clicked into place, sealing them in, shutting out the world and its complications and everything except them. This is it, Cole said, returning to stand beside the bed. This is where you belong, Tess. In my bed, in my life, permanent and protected, and absolutely claimed. No more guest suites, no more careful distance, no more pretending we're not building toward forever. Forever is terrifying, Tess said. Forever is ours, Cole corrected. And we're strong enough to build it properly this time. He climbed into bed beside her, pulling her against him with possession that should have felt suffocating but instead felt necessary, pulling the covers over them both, his arms creating a cage that felt more like sanctuary than prison. Sleep, Cole commanded softly. Rest. Recover. And when you wake up knowing you're mine. I'm yours. And we're building something permanent whether fear likes it or not. Tess pressed her face against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her cheek, feeling his heat surrounding her like armor against everything that had threatened to destroy her. I love you, she whispered. I've loved you through 4 years of separation, through 3 months of terror, through everything. I never stopped. I know, Cole said, his arms tightening. I've always known. Just needed you to be brave enough to admit it, to choose it, to stay instead of running. I'm staying, Tess promised. No matter what comes, no matter how difficult it gets, I'm staying. We're building this together. And wrapped in his arms in a bed that felt like home, Tess finally let herself believe that second chances weren't just possible, they were real. They were theirs, and they were strong enough to survive anything if they were brave enough to fight for them together. Tess woke to early morning light filtering through windows that overlooked a city beginning to stir 45 floors below. For the first time in 4 years, she woke without the crushing weight of fear about rent, about food, about survival. She woke safe, protected, surrounded by warmth that had nothing to do with expensive bedding and everything to do with the man whose arms were still wrapped around her, whose steady breathing suggested he was awake but content to lie still while she processed consciousness. "You're awake," Cole said quietly, confirming her suspicion. "How long have you been awake?" Tess asked. "An hour. Maybe longer. I didn't want to move and risk waking you. You needed the rest." His hand moved to rest gently over her stomach, a gesture that was becoming familiar, protective without being possessive. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Tess admitted. "More rested than I've felt in I don't know how long. Years, maybe." She turned in his arms to face him, seeing his features softened by early morning light, seeing the vulnerability he only showed in these unguarded moments. "Thank you. For last night. For everything. For not giving up on me even when I'd given up on myself." "I never gave up," Cole said. "Couldn't give up." "You're—" He stopped, searching for words. "You're essential. The only thing that's ever really mattered beyond business and power and all the things I convinced myself were important before I met you." Tess traced her fingers along his jaw, feeling stubble that suggested he hadn't shaved yesterday, feeling the sharp angles that had become more pronounced in 4 years of separation. "What happens now? Logistically, I mean. We've said we're getting remarried, but there are details to manage, conversations to have, practical matters to address. Now I take care of everything," Cole said. "Legal paperwork to reverse the divorce, doctor appointments to ensure you and the baby are progressing healthily, arrangements for the wedding whenever you're ready. You just rest, recover, let me handle the logistics of rebuilding our life." "That sounds like you're taking control again," Tess observed carefully. "That sounds like me handling practical matters while you focus on health," Cole corrected. "But if you want input on any of it, the wedding timeline, the legal process, how we structure our lives going forward, you tell me. This is partnership, Tess. I handle what you don't have energy for. You maintain autonomy over decisions that matter to you. We communicate about where those boundaries lie." "Okay," Tess said. "Then here's what matters to me. I want a small wedding. Just us. Maybe a few close friends if you have people you want present. Nothing elaborate. Nothing that requires months of planning. Nothing that feels performative. Just—" She paused, trying to articulate what she needed. "Just something honest and simple that celebrates us rather than creating spectacle." "Small wedding," Cole agreed immediately. "We can do it here in the penthouse, or somewhere else if you prefer. Whatever you want, whenever you're ready. And I want to work," Tess continued. "Not immediately, not while I'm still recovering, but eventually. I want to contribute something beyond being your wife and the mother of your child. Want to use my education, want to feel productive, want to maintain identity separate from me," Cole finished. "I understand. And when you're ready, when Dr. Chen clears you for normal activity, we'll figure out what that looks like. Consulting work maybe? Or freelance projects that let you use your art history expertise without the full-time commitment. Something that gives you purpose while respecting your limitations as a new mother." "You're being very accommodating," Tess said. "I'm learning," Cole corrected. "Learning that accommodating your needs doesn't weaken me, that supporting your independence actually strengthens us. Learning what should have been obvious 4 years ago, that loving someone means helping them be who they want to be, not molding them into who you want them to be." Tess felt tears threaten, overwhelmed by how much he'd changed, how much he'd learned, how much effort he was investing in building something better than what they'd had before. "I don't deserve you. You deserve everything," Cole said fiercely. "You deserve a husband who prioritizes you, who communicates honestly, who respects your autonomy while ensuring your safety. You deserve a partner who's learned from past mistakes instead of repeating them. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving I can be that person." His hand moved more deliberately over her stomach, and Tess realized he was doing it unconsciously, touching the place where their child was growing, like he needed physical confirmation of the life they'd created. "Tell me about the baby," she said. "What you're feeling about becoming a father. We haven't really discussed it beyond the logistics." Cole was quiet for a moment, his expression shifting to something vulnerable and almost frightened. "I'm terrified," he admitted. "Terrified I'll fail at this the way I failed at being a husband the first time. Terrified I'll be too controlling, too protective, too unable to let our child take necessary risks. Terrified I'll recreate my father's mistakes. He was a hard man, Tess. Cold, distant. Built an empire but couldn't build relationships. I'm terrified I'm too much like him, that I'll damage our child through the same emotional distance that damaged me." "You're not your father," Tess said firmly. "You're someone who's learned to communicate, to acknowledge fear, to prioritize relationships over empire. Those aren't your father's traits. Those are yours, earned through hard experience and conscious effort. I hope you're right, Cole said. Because this child deserves better than a father who's more comfortable with power than with love, who solves problems through control rather than connection. Deserves better than what I had growing up. Then we'll give them better, Tess said. Together, we'll build a home where they feel safe to be themselves, where they can take risks without fear of failure, where they know they're loved unconditionally, rather than valued for achievements. She stopped as Cole suddenly sat up, his hand pressing more firmly against her stomach, his expression shifting to intense focus. Did you feel that? Feel what? Tess asked. The baby moved, Cole said, wonder evident in his voice. Just now. A flutter against my palm. Did you feel it? Tess concentrated, trying to identify what he'd felt. And there it was, a subtle sensation, like butterfly wings brushing against her from the inside. So faint she'd probably been experiencing it for days without recognizing it. Oh, she breathed. Oh, that's the baby? That's our child, Cole said, his voice rough with emotion. That's the life we created, confirming they're real, they're healthy, they're growing despite everything you've been through. He pressed his ear against her stomach, listening to things he couldn't possibly hear yet, the heartbeat too small for human detection without ultrasound, the movements too subtle for anything but a father's desperate hope. And Tess watched him, seeing the powerful Mafia Boss reduced to someone awed and terrified by the tiny life they'd made together, seeing vulnerability she'd rarely witnessed during their marriage. I'm going to protect you both, Cole said against her stomach, his voice carrying the weight of absolute vow. I'm going to ensure you have everything you need, that you're safe from every threat I can anticipate or eliminate. I'm going to be the husband and father you both deserve. No more mistakes, no more control that drives people away. No more prioritizing empire over family. We know, Tess said softly, her hands moving to his hair, holding him while he processed overwhelming emotion. We know, Cole. And we're going to be okay. All three of us. We're going to build something better than what came before. Cole pulled her closer, his arms surrounding her with possession and protection and overwhelming love that she finally believed wasn't the same as control. And in that moment, wrapped in his arms with their child moving between them, Tess understood something fundamental, that love required risk, that family required sacrifice, that building something permanent meant choosing each other every day despite fear and difficulty, and all the ways they could fail. They had work to do, conversations to have, boundaries to negotiate as they figured out how to parent together, how to balance his world with her needs, how to maintain individual identities while building shared life. But right now, in this moment, none of that mattered as much as the simple truth that they'd found each other again, that they'd chosen each other despite everything, that they were building something real and permanent and strong enough to survive whatever came next. Cole stood finally, pulling her up with him, leading her to the windows where they could watch the city wake below them. The world that had almost destroyed her when she'd tried to navigate it alone looked less threatening from this height, from this position of safety and partnership. This is it, Cole said, his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder, his hands clasped over her stomach. This is what matters. You. Me. Our child. Everything else, the business, the empire, the power and reputation and territory, it's all just infrastructure to support this. To ensure you're both safe, protected, provided for, this is the foundation everything else is built on. This is no longer about your empire, Tess said quietly, understanding finally what he'd been trying to tell her. It's about this. About us. About building family instead of just building power. Exactly, Cole confirmed. The empire exists to serve this, not the other way around, and I'll sacrifice any part of it, any expansion, any opportunity, any acquisition if it threatens what we're building here. He turned her in his arms, pulling her close again, kissing her with tenderness that felt like a promise. Welcome home, Tess. Welcome back to where you've always belonged. Home, Tess repeated, the word feeling right in a way it hadn't for 4 years. I'm home. And finally, truly, she was. The penthouse that had once felt like a gilded cage now felt like sanctuary. The man who'd once overwhelmed her with control now felt like partner. The future that had terrified her now felt like possibility. They would stumble. They would struggle. They would fight and disagree and trigger each other's fears in ways that required constant communication and adjustment. But they would do it together, building something permanent from the wreckage of what had failed before, proving that second chances were possible when people were brave enough to learn from mistakes and choose each other despite fear. Cole picked her up suddenly, carrying her back to the bed with purpose, laying her down gently before settling beside her, his body curving protectively around hers, his hand returning to its now familiar position over her stomach. "Stay," he commanded softly. "Rest. Let me take care of everything else while you focus on growing our child, recovering your strength, learning to trust that I've changed enough to deserve this second chance." "I'll stay," Tess promised. "No more running, no more letting fear control decisions. I'll stay and build this with you, whatever it takes." The heavy door was closed, the world shut out, leaving just them and the life growing between them. The sanctuary was sealed, the family was safe, the future stretched before them, uncertain but hopeful. And in a penthouse high above a city that had almost destroyed her, Tess Walker, soon to be Tess Hudson again, finally understood that strength came in many forms. Sometimes it looked like fierce independence. Sometimes it looked like accepting help. Sometimes it looked like running away to protect yourself. And sometimes it looked like staying, committing, choosing love despite every reason fear provided to flee. She'd tried running. Now she would try staying. And she would discover that staying, choosing partnership over isolation, building family over maintaining prideful independence, that was the bravest thing she'd ever done. The world outside could wait. The empire could rebuild itself around their new priorities. The future could unfold according to its own timeline. Right now, in this moment, there was just them, two people who'd found each other again after 4 years of mistakes and loneliness. Two people choosing each other despite valid fears. Two people building something permanent from the courage to try again. They were home. They were safe. They were finally, truly, together. And that was enough.